Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Wow. I am absolutely thrilled to be in conversation with the Fatima Bhutto. I'm not going to waste any time with introductions because we all know what Fatima does. We know the incredible writer, author, thought leader, change maker that Fatima is, and according to not just me, but the internet also, a style icon also. We're going to talk about all of that. But thank you so much, Fatima, for taking out time and being here at this virtual version of Wow. How
My
are you?
my pleasure. Thank you, Sarmad, and thank you for having me. Wow. And wa alaikum assalam to everybody. I'm well. I'm good. Thank you.
How does it feel, Fatima? I think other than how it is like, where are you and how do you feel? I mean, we are kind of waking up from, the aftermath of so much. And now post vaccine, it is, we're trying to understand the new normal. So how does it feel? Is the world really waking up again?
I I am somewhere between cynicism and optimism. I
Mm-hmm.
have to say, I think that we're not over with this whole thing yet. And I think we've got a couple more years of it to go, unfortunately. And I don't want to be like the bearer of bad news, but I think what is interesting about this strange world we live in is that it's really forcing us to think about how we live and asking us to live thoughtfully. You know, it's not just a question of our own freedoms or our own wish to live a normal life. It's also how do we protect others and how do we live well with each other.
True
And
that.
and so whenever I get annoyed at the pandemic, I think this is really asking us to live unselfishly. And that's actually quite an important lesson. And I think until we learn, we're going to be destined to keep living in it.
And Fatima, are you like the vaccine business, all of that? I mean, that's done, the booster shots. I mean, it just keeps like
Yeah,
getting more
yeah,
complicated.
it is. But I always think, we wear seatbelts in cars to protect ourselves, to protect others. This is not a question for me of making some sort of political stand. This is about protecting the vulnerable people in our communities. And so,
Right.
I'm all up to date with the vaccines.
Uh,
And imagine if people during the smallpox era said, I don't feel like having the smallpox vaccine, thank you, it's a question of my freedom. We'd all have smallpox today. So, just
right,
get your
right.
vaccines, wear your masks, and then we can all move on with life, hopefully.
My booster's due soon, so I'm going to get my booster. Fatima, you do so much, mashallah, and you do it so well. And but amidst all these identities where you don't only navigate through various forms of expression through your work, but now it's also like it almost sounds a little hackneyed when we say, oh, people are influencers and people are thought leaders, but we do so much through our people like you particularly, you do so much. What is that one identity that's closest to your heart? Is Fatima an author? Is Fatima a thought leader? Is Fatima, with all the politics that is such a DNA in your case?
I, you know, I don't know. I think one shouldn't get too attached to these kind of descriptions.
Mhm.
And I'm sensitive about it because I really feel that I've never stopped learning um, anything. So I would be anxious to be considered a thought leader because I haven't finished thinking, like I haven't finished changing my mind, I haven't finished picking up new ideas. And so I would be like a thought student in my mind. And even as a writer, I mean, I've always thought of myself closely connected to the world of language and literature and books and stories because it's what I've always loved. But at the same time, the more I write, the more I realize how little I know and how much there is to learn. And how learning really, when you start to look, is everywhere. It can be found everywhere. So I am a writer. I would say that's probably high up in my self-identification. But I'm a learning writer. I'm not a finished writer. And otherwise, I suppose, um, gosh, I don't know really. A student. I mean, I like to think of myself as a student because it is a great joy of life to know that you're not finished with what's out there. I find that very exciting.
Fatima, so when we look at your writing, it is such a diverse. You're 6 books old, right? And I'm sure that
Yeah.
about that,
No, no, I
yeah,
think that's right. Yeah.
yeah. And from fiction to nonfiction, and with all sorts of acclaim under the sky. Do you think there is a pressure that, once, I mean, there is an expression that you have within, and then, there's an urge to deliver it somehow. But is there a pressure that, oh, I need to keep at it
Hmm.
and I need to keep delivering? I don't know. I mean, is there like, is that like an external thing, or one just relies on an internal urge to keep at it?
Hmm. Well, I would say that there are all kinds of pressures, probably. But I think I've been quite good with myself, probably because my internal pressure is so high at zoning out external pressure. So I try in life not to be too influenced by the external pressures. But but I am quite tough on myself in the
Mm,
sense that if I'm not working, what am I doing? So I am the kind of person who always needs to be at some kind of work. And I am one of those people that thinks work is everywhere and information is always being delivered to us in all kinds of ways, so long as we're looking for it.
mm.
So even if I'm not writing, I am never off, I guess. I'm always looking for something, I'm hunting something, and I might not always know what it is, but I know that I want to be alert when it comes, when it arrives.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I suppose for me, I've always written because I felt an urgent need to say something
mm.
or to express doubt, or it's not necessarily that I'm certain with whatever I say, but to ask questions and and to share whatever dilemma is bothering me with anyone who cares to listen, I suppose.
And Fatma, when you are, say, observing, when you are, say, making little mental notes or notes, what's the literal practice that Fatima Bhutto does? Like, I mean, is it notes on your phone? Is it little voice memos? Like, I'm just intrigued.
It's changed over the years, Sarma, and I don't know if you're the same with your work, but when I started writing, I used to write a column for the news and
Yes.
for Jung. And I used to, it was a weekly column. And so, when you have to produce a column every week, you're really always searching. And I had a terrible system. I would have like an A4 sheet of paper that I would fold up into little squares. And then I would write minuscule notes on every side. And by the time I'd finished, I would open up a paper with like whatever it is, 6 different blocks of upside down writing. And it was, I mean, now when I think about it, it gives me a kind of anxiety. But at the time, it allowed me, I don't know, it allowed me to pack a whole bunch of information
Mm.
and to carry that information easily. Now, I would say a lot of it is like I'm very particular about notebooks. So if I'm working on something, I have like a system of notebooks. Some are for reminders, some are for actual taking notes, some are for observing, some are for interviews.
Right, right, right.
Yeah, it's impossible. But I do sometimes leave myself like little emails. If I don't have my notebooks with me, I'll
Right.
email myself with whatever, or I'll send a message to myself, which can also be confusing when you see it like hours later and you think, what was
That is fascinating. By the way, again, I'm just trying to get into the creative space that your beautiful mind has. When and how do you weigh that an idea or a story or that little scratch, that seed, that germ is good enough to 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 bloom into a book? I mean,
Hmm.
have you abandoned ideas at some
Oh
point while
yeah.
working?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, for a book, it's much harder, obviously, because a book is something you will have to live with for many years while you're writing it. And then even when you finish writing it, when you're editing it, and then when you finish editing it, when you think you're done with it, that's when the rest of the world sees it.
Right,
So it's
right.
something you have to have a deep commitment to. And I always know something is a book when it gets lodged in my brain and it doesn't leave, no matter what. Even if I'm
Mm,
not working or I'm not hunting for information, if I'm just sitting there doing a crossword, this thing is trying to interrupt my thoughts.
mm, mm,
That's usually when I know I have a book. But articles are different. Articles they are maybe more intense in terms of interruptions.
mm,
And I have a feeling that I can't really breathe. I feel unsettled unless I sit down and put this thing down immediately. So they're slightly more intense, but also they have their own limits. So you know that this is not a book. I'm not going to think about this for
mm,
4 years. I'm thinking about this because I've just encountered something new, and I need to understand it in new ways. But yeah, I've abandoned plenty of things. I think one has to have a real detachment in order to
mm,
work as a creative person because you can't be attached to something as being linked to your sense of self or
mm.
your worth. Um, you also have to have a bit of thick skin because what you're interested in might not be what other people care about at that moment. So no, I'm quite good at putting things down if they need to be put down as well.
And Fatma, also, is there a conscious decision to, oh, now I'm going to pick up nonfiction, and this is time for a fiction piece?
Hmm. It really depends because for me, they're like using different muscles, um,
Right, right.
or like thinking in different grammar. For me,
Mm,
fiction is um, very freeing to work on, but it's
mm,
much harder, and I
mm,
need I need to be, I guess, mentally or emotionally, I need to be feeling really solid to work on fiction.
mm,
But at the
mm.
same time, fiction is usually much more disturbing. It's something that really gnaws at me. That's why I've had to sit down
Right, right.
and put it to paper. Whereas I like the investigative quality of nonfiction. I really
Mm,
enjoy the process of
mm,
having an argument and then going out to check if it's right or to check if I'm wrong. And so I need less mental energy or emotional energy for that, but I need a
mm,
different kind of energy because you're a sort of mini investigator in a way. You are
mm,
going out
mm.
to test your ideas against the world, to put your ideas in confrontation with other ideas. So that requires a kind of persistence of its own.
But Fatima, is fiction completely meditative like that? Is it completely solitary, or like does
Mhm.
that also require research or some field work?
Well, it's both, but I think you're right. You put it really well. It's actually very meditative. The
Mm,
things that I write fiction about are the things that I feel very deeply,
mm,
um, and that I need some kind of privacy to touch, to
mm,
look at, and to consider. So they are super solitary exercises.
mm,
When
mm,
you're working on a nonfiction book, you've got to go and call people up and tell them what you're doing. And as a writer and maybe as a person, I'm quite a guarded person. I don't
mm,
really want to do that. I would rather think on my own,
mm, mm,
and then tell people when I'm certain. So when I'm writing novels, no one has to know about it except me, which I
mm.
quite enjoy. Whereas when I'm writing nonfiction,
Mm,
it's sort of collaborative. You need to interview people, you
mm.
need to go to libraries, you need to ask for things. Um, and that is less solitary, but I like people too. I mean, I am curious, so that fulfills another itch, I guess.
Right. Fatima Manto said at some point, and I'm paraphrasing, not quoting really, something to the effect that, how lucky am I that, I have the capacity and the skill to express what I feel. Like my torment, I feel so fortunate that I can write stories on it. That necessary element of personal drama and tragedy and loss, I mean, is it like a necessary curse you feel like when one has to express such, I don't know.
Um, hmm. Yeah, I would agree with Manto. I feel very fortunate that I get to do what I love.
Mm,
That I never have a ceiling for what I love. The
mm,
things I
mm,
can learn and the things that I'm able to challenge myself with never seem to stop. But I just wrote a piece which came out in Granta just now in February.
Mm,
It's called The Hour of the Wolf. And I wrote it, it's really a long essay about grief and about
mm,
our connection with animals, what animals teach us about grief and love,
mm,
and what it means to live amongst things that used to be wild, but that
mm,
because we are tamed, we have also forced some restrictions on. And for me, it was a very personal piece to write, and I really sat with it for a really long time um, because it felt so personal, and I needed for it to be exactly right before I shared it. And even when I did share it, I thought, oh, should I have shared this? But I
mm,
think writers or artists do because they know that whatever it is they're feeling, someone else is feeling too.
mm.
And I think that's really that's the only way to survive torment, no, is to know that if you have survived it or if someone else has survived it, then so can you. And I think that's why creative people are so wonderful to be around and also so terrible, actually.
But was in the 90s when I was in high school. I remember that, there are very few South Asian writers that at least I knew of. And I mean, whenever we went, say, book shopping, I mean, there were like, like a tiny little shelf dedicated to just, I say, mostly Indian origin authors, and there were very few. Now, when you entered the space, like, did you have a career in mind about it, or did you do your I mean, was there a research to this space that this is what I'm going to be a
Mm,
part of? And particularly for a woman to then, embark on a journey, which is, again, like any other discipline, I do feel in the trade part of it, it is dominated
mm,
mostly by men and with a
mm.
certain mindset. Or am I?
No, you're very right. You're very right. I mean, I guess I'll answer that in two parts. When I set out to become a writer, I didn't really think about the market as such because I'd always loved books and I'd always loved writing and was very lucky to have a father who really encouraged me as a child. So I always felt from a very early age that I had a right to a voice and I had a right to an opinion and I had a right to do, or say maybe difficult things, and still feel that I should be accepted or allowed to say those things. Um, so I didn't really look into, like, I didn't research like how to get into it or what the space was like. But the thing that I was shocked by was when I was really starting my writing life um, as a columnist in Pakistan and for Pakistani papers. There was a point at which foreign papers or American or English papers started to notice the writing and then started to ask me to write for them and then I noticed something strange. It was also a period in Pakistan's history, which was, as everyone will remember who lived through it, this was the early 2000s. There was a lot of terrorism. There was a lot of violence. The war in Afghanistan was in full swing. And you had a lot of interest in Pakistan globally. And it was then that I started to understand when I started to talk about what I felt about the war on terror or what I felt about renditions or people being picked up and taken, out of Pakistan without trial. When I started to write about this, I noticed a lot of Western journalists who were mainly men, to be honest, but they were women too,
Mm,
who became quite well, aggressive. I think they didn't like that we tell our side of the story. The
mm,
story of the war on terror, the story of 9/11, the story of um, occupation and power was always theirs to tell. And I was surprised to see how much resistance they had to having actual Pakistanis or actual Afghans or actual
mm,
Iraqis or actual brown people not just disagreeing with them, but being angry at them, having a
mm,
rage against them,
mm,
having wounds that they had caused.
mm,
That to me was really surprising. And initially I thought it was kind of this older male response. But I met plenty of women journalists who were responding exactly the same, you know. These are people who made careers off our pain, and we weren't allowed to talk about our pain, only they were.
So I deal with filmmaking students mostly. I mean, not of any other kind, but so there are cliches of student filmmaking, for example, particularly people who want to become filmmakers, and then their thesis film is really important. But it can be boiled down to 5 or 6 kinds of things that they think work.
Okay.
Work with a certain audience, and particularly when they are aiming for, as we call it, the festival circuit, they know what to sell from this part of the world, and that has become, its own stereotype, etc. Now, when young writers, aspiring writers, or people, who want like a mid-career detour, and they think that they can write. Now, we will talk about South Asia Speaks in connection to that. How does one how does one find the true voice that this is what I want to write about? Whereas at the end of the day, I mean, we do want to claim, we do want people to read it. So
Hmm.
that whole murkiness about, say, how does one decide one day that I want to be on that journey to write a book?
Yeah.
And what's your advice there?
Well, I think if one starts to think, what do people want to read, or what will people buy, or what appeals to outsiders, then one gets really misled. Kind of in the same way you're describing about festival circuits, because outside markets, let's call them that, are fickle. They change. They change all the time. One day they want this, the next day they want that. Culture, as you know, moves incredibly quickly, and it's an impossible race to keep up with culture.
True,
That's why
true.
culture is so fascinating, because it's dynamic and it's constantly evolving. So I would say it's a mistake to choose what you want to write about based on that. It will
Mm,
always
mm,
change, and you will always be either left behind or too early or not
mm,
exactly at the right moment. But if you write about what it is that truly moves you,
mm,
that
mm,
truly speaks to you, that sits very close to you in your thinking and your feeling, um,
mm,
then that never really goes out of
mm,
momentum. It never runs out of fuel. You will always have the energy to continue with that story. And you
mm,
bring to that story dedication, attention,
mm,
love, and care. So I always advise writers to do that, to write what it is that
mm,
they wish someone had written for them.
mm.
To write the book they wish was already out in the bookstores. And you mentioned South Asia Speaks, which is a mentorship program that I'm
Right.
involved with. And what we try to do with South Asia Speaks is we're trying to nurture early career writers. So you don't have to be 20 years old. You could be 45 years old, but writing is not your career. Like, you don't have already a
Mhm.
published body of work. And what we're doing is we're trying to get writers who are living in South Asia, so Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Nepal, India, etc., Sri Lanka, to submit. And if they are chosen, they will spend a year working with a mentor.
Ah,
And we have writers from all over South Asia. We also have international writers. And what happens is that a South Asia Speaks fellow will have phone calls with their mentor, and their mentor will help guide them through
mm,
publishing their first book. Because it's a world of gatekeepers. If you don't know the right people, if you don't have connections in publishing,
right.
how do you go forward? So we're really keen. I'm really keen to have more Pakistani writers apply. We've got some amazing Pakistani fellows this year, and we had some great
Uh-huh.
ones last year too. But we need more. We are the guardians of this incredible history and heritage, and we are the storytellers of our worlds. If we don't tell these stories, who is telling them?
But the translations,
Hmm.
your work, I mean, do you deliberately not want a lot of translate? I mean, particularly like I was looking up, I was like, I want to see Fatma's books in Urdu, translated in Urdu. I
I want
mean,
to see them in Urdu too.
yeah,
I
yeah.
want to see them in Urdu too. We have It's not my resistance. I would be very happy
Hmm.
to have all my books in Urdu. It's
Hmm.
that in the field of publishing, the translator has to approach you and say, "We would like to translate your book."
Right.
Um, and then you give them the rights to do it, and off they
Mhm.
go. So the Runaways does actually, in theory, it hasn't happened yet, but we're waiting for the Urdu translation to be completed. So I'm
Oh,
really
oh,
hoping the
okay.
Runaways will be in Urdu.
Oh, I'm excited.
But the other books, they haven't asked to translate it. So I'm still waiting. If there's anyone who
There.
wants to, I'm
It's
more than
there.
happy.
What now? What shall we be excited about? What's in store and what's coming up soon?
Well, it's too early to say. I mean, I'm working on the very early stages of a new book, but it's too early really to know
Okay.
what it is yet. So um, I won't be annoying about that. But the pandemic has been a weird time, I think, for everybody, and
Yeah.
it's hard to write about the world if you're not really in touch with
Mm.
it, if you're cut
Right,
off.
right, right.
So I hope that this year will be more writing. I've been doing online seminars on writing fiction and nonfiction, um, really because I miss people, actually. I miss the contact that we used to have at literary events and talks. So I'll
Right.
be doing a bit
Yeah.
of that this year. And
Yeah.
then hopefully a bit of journalism too.
Uh-huh.
The first one out in Granta this month, and I hope a couple more big pieces later on, but we'll see.
And at any point, has that idea crossed your mind that you would want to write a screenplay or you would want to write a film?
I actually have written
Ah,
only one screenplay. I adapted Shadow of the Crescent Moon, which was my first novel.
right.
And I co-wrote it with Michael Radford, who was the director of Il Postino and Merchant of Venice. And
Oh, my bad, my bad, my
no,
inadequate.
you wouldn't know about it because it's never been made into a film.
Oh,
I don't know how you make films, Sarmad, because I find it an impossible world. It's for me like being on Mars to make films. We had an option on it, and then
uh-huh.
the option ran out, and then we wanted to go in a different direction, so we didn't give it to a
Yeah,
new director.
yeah.
But I've got the script, it's just sitting there, so maybe one day.
Right,
Maybe.
right. And Fatima, just to elaborate on the South Asia Speaks thing, because I was looking it up, and it's not only for writers who want to write, say, novels or nonfiction, but also screenplays, it said. Is that
I
correct?
think I'm not sure. I think are we taking screen? I've got to double check because I don't do screenplays.
Okay, okay,
It's
okay.
too
We need
specific
to
for
check. I think so. I think so. Or maybe just my fanciful
We
thinking.
do translations. We do people who are working in translations. We do nonfiction. We do fiction. We do pretty much everything. I mean, I don't think we've got poetry at the moment, but there's a website and people can check. But maybe you and I should do my screenplay. Now I've just had an idea. Maybe I should send it to you. Um,
Sure, sure, Papa. No, please, it's been such a pleasure, such an honor. My only regret is that this is not happening in person, but someday soon. Thank you
Inshallah.
very, very much for taking out time, Fatima, and keep shining and keep writing. And,
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Hope it's in person next time.
and thank you, Fatima.
Bye.
And thank you, everyone, for watching this session. And hopefully, you will have a lot more and really exciting stuff on this platform. Wow.